So after spending the last 665 days in prison, it looks like Lil Durk's trial has finally started as he goes on to face life in prison. That's right, man. After doing his dance on TikTok and going viral with it, it looks like Lil Durk now faces life in prison without parole, as Lil Durk would get arrested back in 2024 and he has been in jail ever since.
The feds just revealed new evidence in the Lil Durk trial, and the claim at the center of it is sending shockwaves through the rap world. Prosecutors are pushing the allegation that Lil Durk ordered a hit connected to NBA YoungBoy's camp, and they say the evidence being brought into that Los Angeles courtroom could change the entire direction of this case.
It looked like they really trying to cook Durk. Everything you need to know about day 2 of the Lil Durk trial in 1 minute. When everybody showed up to court today, the potential jurors followed up on questions based on the first day. All of that took a minute, but then Lil Durk legal team said they wanted to strike juror 18 because on the questionnaire, juror 18 said by looking at them, they look guilty. And I've seen a lot of people pass away by people that looks like them. Then after that, that's when the judge responded to the juror and said they pretty sure that a lot of Americans feel the same way. And they pretty sure a lot of people feel like they look guilty based off their appearance. But they gotta put that to the side and be fair and only use facts. That's in this case. Now, I ain't gonna lie, if the jury can't put that aside, I'm pretty sure they gonna kick them off the case because they can't even be a fair jury, let's be serious. But the judge sound like they on Durk's side a little bit. But the judge did end up stating the frustration of the courthouse due to the fans that's outside the courthouse handing out free Durk signs and postcards. The judge ended up warning the individuals that they could end up facing prosecution or contempt of court if they keep doing it. So all of that just gotta stop, and they just gotta let everybody do their job. But y'all let me know what y'all think about this, man. Do y'all think Durk might be cooked though? He got a chance. Because all I got to say is free Durk. And I did drop a song called Free Durk on YouTube, so y'all can check that out and let me know if I went crazy or not. Because, man, free Durk going, bro.
The conflict behind the case reaches back to King Von, Quando Rondo, and the long-running tension between Lil Durk's OTF and NBA YoungBoy's camp. Prosecutors say that feud went far beyond music and turned into something much more serious. But what happened during jury selection before the jury even heard the government's evidence could be one of the biggest surprises so far. Stay with us, because the government's version of what Durk allegedly did takes this case to a whole different level.
I'm not gonna lie, this judge has got a sense of humor and a lot of humility. He said, look, I don't mean to offend anyone by saying this. He says, clearly Lil Durk knows more about music, more about being successful in the rap game, more about the music industry than I do. And he was very, very humble. I'm not going to lie. This judge is amazing, but he basically said he knows more. He seems to know more about music than I know about law. And he said Durk's been more successful as a musician and as a businessman than I have as a lawyer. I'm thinking this is a judge at the top of his game. Even he's low key a little bit starstruck. He's looking at Smirk's career thinking this guy went further than I ever did. That was kind of crazy, but he said it sort of like slightly in jest. And it's good to see this judge isn't stone-faced serious all the time. And he's got the humility to say, look, hey, Durk's more popping as a drill rapper than I was as a lawyer. I'm going to say it. But at the end of the day, the fate is in the jury's hands. But the judge went on to say, look, regarding gangs, he's going to ask the jury how gangs have affected their families, anything that they've been to related to gangs. And he's going to ask them with specific instructions. And he said a couple of these jurors, there were 4 jurors. He said, I'm planning to exclude those. There's enough that I will not. He said there's enough to exclude. I might not call everybody up here. He said I might call 60 of the 80 jurors up here. He said we need to get the numbers down to 41 jurors ASAP. He said I'd rather have 80 than 60 and just get everything all done. He said I'm going to call everyone up, get it down to 60 and then get it down to 41. Let's get on with this, basically.
Yo, what's good, fam? Today, we're breaking down the new evidence the government is presenting in the Lil Durk federal trial, how jury selection exposed a situation nobody expected, the role of the Akademiks interview, the battle over rap lyrics, the digital evidence prosecutors have reportedly been building for years, and what all of it could mean for where this case is actually headed. Let's get into it. To understand the weight of what is happening inside that federal courtroom, you have to go back to where this story started.
I'm holding back my tears to get my vocals clear.
Dirk Devontae Banks grew up in Englewood on Chicago's South Side and built Only the Family, better known as OTF, into one of the most influential collectives in modern drill music. OTF was never just a record label. It became a brotherhood made up of artists connected by neighborhood, loyalty, and years of shared history. And one of the biggest relationships inside that circle was between Dirk and Davon Bennett, better known as King Von. Von was one of Chicago drill's most gifted storytellers, a rapper who could make his songs feel raw, personal, and almost like you were watching the story unfold in real time.
A money laundering case and a criminal case that was undisclosed, and they actually said that they enjoyed being a juror, but there wasn't any sort of bias that it seemed to be. There was another one who, I'm not even going to say what was said, but they basically just said that they lived in a specific area of Los Angeles. I don't know if it's the nicest area, but that's all we knew. There was another person who basically said they said that they forgot that they wrote that they presume people are not innocent until proven guilty, but they were pressed on that and they said, oh, it's my bad, like it was an accident, I didn't mean to do that. Someone else had accidentally said in response to a question that they were uncomfortable with some of the issues of trial. When they were asked, they were like, oh, that was a mistake, I meant to say I'm comfortable. So they were allowed in. And then there was only one alternate who we had information on, and that was somebody who that they claimed didn't speak very good English. They were allowed in as an alternate. Everybody else we don't have the information on, but it seems like the really, really questionable people, they were dismissed pretty quickly. Judge very fair on both sides, so we got the jury, and it looks like things will be proceeding ahead with opening statements on the next court date.
Then came November 6, 2020. King Von was shot and killed outside an Atlanta hookah lounge following an altercation involving rapper Quando Rondo and people around his crew. Rondo's real name is Tiquian Bowman, and his associates were present during the confrontation that ended with Von's death. For OTF, the loss hit hard, and prosecutors now argue that the fallout never truly disappeared. Lil Tim, one of Rondo's associates, was charged in connection with Von's death, but those charges were later dropped following a self-defense determination. For prosecutors, though, that legal outcome was not the end of the story. According to the federal indictment, it became the starting point for what they describe as a separate retaliatory plot involving Dirk.
Hey man, this Lil Durk judge is on some BS. First, he wants someone that he knows from high school to serve on the jury. Secondly, someone literally wrote that looking at Lil Durk and the other defendants, they automatically are guilty. Oh, well, you know, that doesn't necessarily mean that they can't judge based upon the evidence. Won't you bring them in? But don't worry, that's how this stuff goes, right? Because the judge basically wants the defense to waste one of their 10 preemptory challenges. So we get it, we get with the program, but man, Judge Fitzgerald on that BS, man. I'm here to report it, and I'm going to tell you everything that you need to know. Make sure you guys join my Discord where I give you the latest news from straight inside the courthouse.
The government alleges that Dirk did not view the legal resolution as the final word, and instead allegedly turned toward another kind of response. Prosecutors also point to statements Dirk made publicly in the months that followed as part of the evidence they assembled. But here's the key distinction that gets lost in a lot of online discussions. This federal case is not about an alleged attempt by Dirk to personally kill NBA Youngboy. Youngboy never broke again as part of the larger rivalry because of his connection to Rondo and the long-running tension between the different camps.
Man, so Lil Durk's federal trial is officially starting today. It say that he been in custody 665 days. He facing life in prison if he get found guilty. I ain't gonna lie, bro, I always say this is the scariest shit you can ever go through. Going through a murder trial that carry that much time is scary as hell. You never know if them people gonna find you guilty or not. I don't care if you got the best money lawyers can buy. It's always a chance you can lose. A lot of people feel like it's 50-50 on him beating this case. They say they got a lot of witnesses. His friend OTF Jim is telling on him. The OTF Bonnie dude, I think, telling. Lil Durk said in his song, it ain't no point of getting no lawyer if your homie telling. You just never know who else on this case is ratting on him. I do feel like if he beat this case, he gonna come home and be on fire. Dude was already selling out arenas. If they let him beat this, it's gonna be a wrap. The rapper is barely seeing freedom. Everybody gonna be back riding his wave. They say that this trial might last up to 3 weeks. What y'all think gonna happen? Say in the comments.
but the indictment focuses specifically on an alleged retaliatory plot targeting Quando Rondo and people around him rather than claiming there was a proven attempt on Youngboy's life. That difference matters, especially when social media turns a complicated federal case into one headline. Rondo was the specific target prosecutors say was connected to the fallout surrounding King Von's death. That distinction matters enormously in a courtroom because the government has to prove an alleged agreement, the alleged financing behind it, and the alleged result.
With Durk currently facing murder for hire charges in California, as well as stalking and also firearm offenses, and Durk has pleaded guilty to all of these charges so far.
Not simply point to a long-running feud. The specific event at the center of the indictment is the August 19, 2022 shooting near a gas station in Los Angeles. According to court records, Durk's associates allegedly learned on August 18 that Rondo was staying at a Los Angeles hotel. That same day, 5 men with ties to OTF traveled from Chicago to San Diego before driving to Los Angeles. Prosecutors allege the trip was funded by money connected to Durk. The 5 men named in the indictment are Kayvon London Grant, known as Cuz, DeAndre Dontrell Wilson, known as Daddy, Keith Jones, known as Flacco, David Brian Lindsay, known as Brownies, and Asa Houston, known as Boogie.
And like I said previously, if Durk is found guilty of murder for hire, he will spend the rest of his life behind bars. Look, man, I am not gonna lie, it is already looking horrible for Lil Durk. As prosecutors have already confirmed that they have 35 witnesses ready to testify against Lil Durk. And to make it worse, out of those 35, 20 of them are allegedly key witnesses. With OTF Jam considered one of the star witnesses of this case, he has allegedly committed multiple murders on behalf of Durk. It is also alleged that OTF Jam ended up wearing a wire for years around Lil Durk as well. Trial is only looking to last around 2 to 3 weeks, however, the odds are not in Lil Durk's favor. We gotta remember, Durk is currently facing Fed charges that currently have a 99% conviction rate. Not gonna lie, at this point, Durk about to be lucky if he makes it out at all.
Court records describe Kayvon Grant as a top OTF associate. Prosecutors allege he arrived separately by private jet, arranged hotel rooms, purchased 4 ski masks, obtained 2 luxury sedans, and provided firearms, including one that had allegedly been converted into a fully automatic weapon. The amount of preparation described by prosecutors is significant because they argue this was not some random confrontation. Instead, the government describes it as an alleged planned operation. Their theory is that an operation involving travel, vehicles, money, and weapons would require direction and financing from someone higher up. Prosecutors allege that person was Durk, but that remains an allegation, and Durk has pleaded not guilty to the charges. On August 19, 2022, prosecutors allege the men tracked Rondo to an alley behind a gas station and opened fire. Rondo survived, but his cousin and associate, Savia Robinson, publicly known as Lil Pab, was struck and killed. He was 24 years old. Surveillance footage captured parts of the attack, and prosecutors have said they intend to use that footage as evidence in the case. Prosecutors also allege that on the day of the shooting, Durk sent a text to an associate arranging flights that read, "Don't book no flights under no names involved with me." Court records further state that video evidence places Durk at a house in the San Fernando Valley that same day. Durk has pleaded not guilty to every charge. His defense attorney, Drew Findling, has argued from the beginning that the government does not have the evidence needed to personally connect Durk to an alleged murder-for-hire agreement. And now, this is where jury selection suddenly became a much bigger part of the story than anyone expected. The court worked through a pool of 80 potential jurors before narrowing things down toward a final panel of 16, made up of 12 sitting jurors and 4 alternates. And both sides had serious concerns from the jump. Prosecutors were worried about fans of Durk's music who might struggle to judge the evidence fairly. The defense, meanwhile, was concerned about jurors who could see a black rapper facing gang-related charges and assume he was guilty before the government's first piece of evidence even appeared. Those concerns became real almost immediately. The defense pushed for intensive background checks on the entire jury pool, specifically looking for signs of implicit bias. That decision quickly became important. Reports from the jury selection process described a prospective juror identified as number 18 making comments that the defense and observers considered deeply troubling. According to those reports, the individual said Durk and his co-defendants looked guilty just by looking at them and reportedly went even further, saying that people like them kill people. Those statements were more than simply having an opinion about the case. They suggested the person was already judging the defendants based on appearance and perceived identity before hearing the evidence. The defense challenged the juror, and the judge removed that individual from consideration. That ruling mattered because it made one thing clear: the case was not going forward with someone who had already reached a conclusion about the defendants before the trial evidence was presented. But the defense had to deal with the opposite problem too. Several prospective jurors appeared to be fans of Durk's music or showed sympathy toward him, which could also create questions about whether they could remain neutral. In a federal trial this serious, being strongly for Durk can be just as problematic as being strongly against him. And the courtroom itself became part of the drama during jury selection. At different points, the judge had to admonish passionate Free Durk supporters in the gallery who were disrupting the proceedings, making it clear that the courtroom was not a fan event and that the trial had to move forward under the rules. Beyond the chaos in the gallery, the court spent serious time screening out potential jurors who admitted that the phrase gangsta rap carried such strong negative and violent associations for them that they could not judge the evidence fairly. One prospective juror reportedly knew Durk's lyrics well enough that the court had to consider whether being a fan could interfere with the person's duty as a juror. A juror who walks in already cheering for someone is not a fair juror, just like someone who enters the courtroom already convinced of guilt is not fair either. The court's job was to find that narrow group of people capable of putting personal opinions aside and focusing on the evidence. Reports indicate the final group of 16 included 5 black jurors among the core panel, a detail observers highlighted because cultural context could become important when the prosecution presents its case. That matters because prosecutors want to introduce rap lyrics, Chicago street terminology, OTF references, and alleged coded communications as evidence. The question is not simply whether jurors recognize those words. It's whether they can understand the context behind them without automatically falling back on stereotypes. That's a serious issue when the meaning of the evidence could depend heavily on how it is interpreted. Imagine a prosecutor putting a text message written in Chicago drill slang on a courtroom screen in front of 12 people who may have never listened to a Lil Durk song. The exact same words could be interpreted very differently depending on what each juror knows, believes, or assumes going into the trial. At the same time, jurors are instructed to follow the law and evaluate the evidence that is properly admitted. And the racial makeup of a jury by itself cannot predict what verdict that jury will reach. But here's where the sheer size of the government's case becomes hard to ignore. Prosecutors have reportedly produced approximately 230 gigabytes of digital evidence along with more than 20,000 pages of investigative material. Take a second and think about that. More than 20,000 pages. In practical terms, that massive collection can include phones, cloud accounts, financial records, location information, surveillance footage, travel records, photographs, text messages, and other communications. Federal investigators have reportedly spent years collecting, organizing, and preparing this material, setting up what could become one of the most evidence-heavy parts of the entire trial. This is not a case built around one bad decision or one witness with a personal score to settle. Prosecutors are presenting it as a broad, federal reconstruction of alleged events covering years of activity. Their goal is to connect different pieces of information and show how those pieces allegedly fit together. Travel and financial records are expected to play a major role in the government's case. Prosecutors allege that the 5 men who traveled from Chicago to Southern California used money connected to Durk and OTF to finance the alleged operation. Flight records, hotel documents, rental car information, and financial transactions can potentially show who was where, when they traveled, and how those movements were funded. That's the kind of paper trail federal investigators often follow, because it can provide evidence independent of a single person's memory or testimony. The iCloud photographs, text messages, and other digital communications are expected to serve a similar purpose. A chain of messages could potentially show coordination even if nobody directly explains what they were planning. A photograph could place someone somewhere they later deny visiting, and location data could potentially create a timeline of movements that prosecutors say matches their version of events. The defense can challenge the authenticity, context, meaning, and relevance of that material. But when prosecutors are dealing with roughly 230 gigabytes of digital evidence, the jury could be facing an extremely dense collection of information, all organized around the government's specific narrative. Then there's the DJ Akademiks interview, which became one of the most talked about pieces of evidence during the pretrial period. In a 2021 DJ Akademiks off-the-record interview, the conversation turned toward King Von's death and the intense public pressure Durk faced to retaliate. What made that moment especially interesting was the presence of Tekashi 6ix9ine and Wack 100 in the segment. During the conversation, they openly mocked Durk over what they portrayed as a failure to avenge Von's death. Prosecutors now want the jury to consider that interview as part of the broader picture they are presenting, while the defense will have its own arguments about what those words actually prove. The ridicule was public, direct, and spread everywhere. Online, people constantly pressured Durk to slide for Von, avenge his death, and respond to the people they believed were responsible. Then came the Akademiks interview, where Durk was asked about all those comments, and his response was cryptic enough that prosecutors later focused heavily on it. Durk said that for some reason he had stopped seeing comments telling him to slide for Von. He suggested the reason might be the water. He then added, "We hear though." Prosecutors interpreted those statements as potentially suggesting that something had already happened, arguing that the reason people had stopped demanding retaliation was because retaliation had already taken place. In a court filing, prosecutors argued that Durk's conversation with Akademiks hinted that he knew more about the alleged murder-for-hire plot than he had publicly acknowledged. The judge reportedly allowed the interview to potentially be presented to jurors because prosecutors argued it was relevant to their theory of motive. The defense pushed back hard, arguing that a vague, figurative comment made during a casual podcast interview should not be treated like a confession. They also argued that giving criminal meaning to street language without supporting evidence could cross a serious line. In their view, context matters, especially when prosecutors are asking jurors to interpret slang as evidence of intent. But the ruling meant the government could try to use the interview, and with motive playing a major role in its theory, prosecutors may argue that the comments show knowledge or intent. Whether jurors see it that way is another question entirely. Then came one of the biggest legal fights of the pretrial battle, the rap lyrics. Prosecutors initially sought to introduce lyrics from 12 of Durk's songs, arguing that they showed him using money for violence while portraying him as a leader connected to OTF. They initially pointed to a verse on the Babyface Ray track Wonderful Wayne and Jackie Boy as evidence they claimed reflected revenge after the shooting, but the defense came back with sworn affidavits from music producers showing that Durk recorded the song in January 2022, months before the August shooting. The defense argument was straightforward. You cannot point to lyrics recorded before an event as proof that the lyrics were describing that later event. After the challenge, the prosecution's superseding indictment removed that lyric from the evidence. The judge also ruled that lyrics from Hanging with Wolves would be excluded from the trial, while other lyrics remained under consideration. That ruling highlighted a major issue in the case. Rap lyrics may sound aggressive or violent, but whether they actually prove criminal conduct is a much more complicated legal question. Defense attorneys in Durk's case argue that his lyrics are exaggerated poetry and that jurors could easily misunderstand them without the cultural context needed to judge them fairly. Prosecutors see it differently, arguing that certain lyrics can reveal intent, relationships, and patterns of conduct that go beyond artistic expression. The fight over that line is much bigger than Durk's case. It's one of the most debated issues where music and criminal law collide, and whatever happens in this courtroom could influence how rap lyrics are treated in future federal prosecutions. But here's where the case gets even more serious, going beyond the rivalry involving Youngboy. Prosecutors are also reportedly preparing evidence involving allegations that Durk ordered violence against OTF associates who failed to show loyalty or did not retaliate after King Von's death. If the government can support those allegations with admissible evidence, it could present a picture of violence allegedly being directed not only toward rivals, but also toward people inside the organization. That is important because prosecutors may argue that such evidence shows a level of control and intimidation connecting directly to their theory about Durk's role. But again, these are allegations the government would have to prove, and the defense has the opportunity to challenge both the evidence and its interpretation. The larger debate over rap lyrics in criminal trials stretches far beyond this case. Prosecutors around the country have tried to use lyrics to establish motive, knowledge, or participation. Defense attorneys argue that rap has a long tradition of exaggeration, storytelling, characters, and performance, and that treating those lyrics like literal confessions can unfairly target a genre strongly associated with black artists. Several states have passed laws limiting when rap lyrics can be introduced as evidence, so the judge's decisions about which songs the jury can actually hear could become one of the most important legal battles of the entire trial. And beyond the lyrics, there's another major issue hanging over the prosecution: cooperating witnesses. Reports have circulated that prosecutors may rely on testimony from Casey Hester, known as OTF Jam, who is reportedly expected to testify for the government. And the first question everybody wants answered is simple: why is Jam telling? In federal cases this large, the answer can involve a lot of factors. When prosecutors have multiple defendants, years of investigation, and a mountain of evidence, people involved can start looking closely at their own legal situation and deciding what their next move should be. Jam allegedly had his own legal exposure connected to OTF activity, including federal charges that could carry serious prison time. In cases like this, cooperating with prosecutors can become a way to reduce that exposure. The government may offer a reduced sentence, drop charges, or other consideration in exchange for testimony that helps build a larger case against a more significant target. Here, Durk is the government's bigger target. That could help explain why Jam is cooperating, but his exact motivations are ultimately something the defense will have the opportunity to challenge in court. The question is whether his testimony is reliable, especially if he stands to benefit from helping prosecutors. And what Jam is reportedly prepared to say could be damaging if admitted and believed by the jury. According to reports about his expected testimony, Jam may describe a conversation in which Durk allegedly pulled him into a bathroom and told him to stop committing so many murders because the number of killings was attracting too much attention from federal investigators. That alleged conversation would be significant because prosecutors could argue it shows Durk had direct knowledge of violent activity connected to OTF. They may also use it to support their theory that Durk was not simply benefiting from OTF's reputation, but was allegedly aware of and involved in managing activity around the group. Prosecutors reportedly plan to take that argument even further by connecting Jam's expected testimony to one of Durk's own songs. In Back Again, a track Durk recorded with King Von, there is a lyric about giving Jam 50 and not having to ask again. Prosecutors argue that the line could refer to an actual payment made to Jam rather than simply being rap bravado. The defense is expected to push back hard on that interpretation. They can argue that lyrics are artistic expression and that treating a dollar amount in a song like a financial receipt requires a major leap in interpretation. But prosecutors may argue that the lyric becomes more significant when placed beside Jam's alleged testimony about receiving money. That combination could give the government a specific theory, a cooperating witness describing an alleged payment and a lyric that prosecutors claim appears to reference the same payment. The defense, however, will have a chance to attack that connection from every angle. Findling's team can scrutinize every benefit Jam received, every inconsistency in his account, and every reason he might have to tell a version of events that helps his own legal situation, rather than presenting what the defense considers the complete truth. In federal cases, cooperating witnesses can be some of the government's most powerful evidence, but they're also vulnerable to intense cross-examination, and if the defense exposes major problems with a witness's story, that can shake the prosecution's entire narrative. So let's break down what this case ultimately comes down to in legal terms. Prosecutors have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Durk directed, orchestrated, and financed a murder-for-hire operation that resulted in the death of Savia Robinson. If convicted on all counts, Durk could face a maximum sentence of life in prison. To win that conviction, prosecutors have to connect every major part of their theory: the alleged bounty involving Rondo, the alleged financing of travel and weapons, the actions of the alleged co-conspirators on August 19, 2022, and the death that followed. Simply having 230 gigabytes of evidence does not automatically prove those elements. Every important piece has to connect to the specific charges, and if the jury believes the government has failed to prove an element beyond a reasonable doubt, that matters. U.S. Attorney Bilal Asali has been direct about how prosecutors view the case. In a court filing, Asali stated that Durk is not on trial for his lyrics or his music, but because prosecutors allege that he directed, orchestrated, and financed the murder plot at issue. That framing tells the jury exactly where the government wants its focus: alleged actions, not reputation. Whether the evidence can hold up under that focus while the defense attacks each major piece is what this trial will ultimately decide. And the outcome could affect not only Durk's future, but also how prosecutors approach cases involving hip-hop artists and their music for years to come. The defense strategy appears to rest on several major arguments. First, the government initially relied on lyrics recorded before the shooting when presenting its theory of retaliation. Drew Findling used sworn affidavits to establish that the song in question was recorded months before the August 2022 shooting, and the superseding indictment later removed that lyric. That gave the defense an early opening to challenge how prosecutors were interpreting the evidence. Second, digital communications and personal associations do not automatically prove that Durk personally directed a crime. Knowing someone is different from ordering them to commit a crime. Having a relationship with someone who commits a crime is also different from directing that crime. Third, cooperating witnesses who have their own legal interests can face serious credibility challenges. Jam's expected testimony will likely be examined closely, including any benefits he received, inconsistencies in his statements, and reasons he might have for cooperating. And fourth, the defense can argue that jurors must understand the cultural context surrounding OTF, Chicago street language, and rap music without confusing artistic expression with proof of a criminal conspiracy. At the end of the day, fam, what's happening inside that Los Angeles courtroom is the result of years of public speculation, music industry drama, and federal investigation now being tested under the strict rules of a criminal trial. Rumors, diss tracks, and years of beef do not establish guilt in federal court. Evidence, witnesses, and legal arguments do. The government has assembled a substantial and complicated case, but substantial is not automatically sufficient. A massive evidence file is not the same thing as proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Lil Durk has not been convicted, and he has pleaded not guilty. His legal team has challenged the government's case at every stage, and the defense will continue fighting over what the evidence actually proves. Now it's your turn. Drop your thoughts in the comments and tell us where you think this trial is headed. If you found this breakdown useful, hit like, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with somebody who wants to follow the case. And as more evidence comes out, we'll be right here breaking it all down.